This film was made as part of the Common Cause Research Project, which aims to understand how universities and Black and minority ethnic communities build collaborations. Each of these films tells a different story of how these collaborations might work. They range from long-term partnerships to short-term projects and events. The films are designed to prompt discussion and reflection. We encourage you to ask, what questions might be learned for the future from these stories?
She's stuck in our past her. Doesn't think her lies were.
Life Chances. The aim was to co-produce with families on low income their experiences of regulatory systems through arts-based practices.
An overall agenda was to help participants reimagine what the welfare state could look like if it put children and families at the centre of reform. The immediate response is, families living on low income, what would it look like if children and families were at the centre of welfare reform? That's even hard to imagine.
So Life Chances is one of 7 projects which are part of a bigger programme of research funded by the ESRC, and it's called Productive Margins.
And this forum took many months of exploration, working between academics, community partners, practitioners, just exploring ideas and notions. And a group of us naturally gelled and shared coffee and conversations around children and families and welfare reform and the impacts of the state on the people that we were working with.
I think both Cardiff and Bristol were on dispersal routes for asylum seekers from the southeast coast. So I think there was a kind of shared experience of actually having to respond to quite a lot of crises amongst that population. And SRCDC and SPAN, they had been identified as the 2 organisations that would be in the Family Poverty Project. They then recruited me as an academic to work with them. So it was a little bit of a reverse kind of organisation, really.
Normally it's on an academic or an institution's terms. They're interested in something and let's look at something, and can you join us as a community partner, identify some people for us to run a focus group or to speak to, and then off they go. Or off the information goes, synthesize, analyze, write, end product, which we are then the recipients of. For me, this project specifically was we were co-creators and co-producers of the initial idea.
There were probably about 12 of us who met quite regularly from very, very different perspectives. And between us, we decided that we were going to commission some artists to work with our groups.
We did an open call for artists, but let's go back another step. Why incorporate arts-based practice? Well, for me, the importance of arts-based practice is it doesn't even add, it centres and allows for a deeper, critical, creative reflection to the topic.
It wasn't just about engagement, it was actually using arts for research.
So I think what arts-based approaches brings is this experimentation and pushing to these productive margins and even overstepping them.
The artists were actually recruited by our community participants and organisations as well as by the university.
What we've been able to do is to work in a very experimental way, fully trusted by the people who we've worked with.
For me, it was the whole process is important because I met women and men that from different cultures.
The framework for the project was 10 families recruited across cultural, religious, linguistically, ethnically diverse family units and settings.
So essentially they facilitated, I think, 11 parallel workshops repeated in Bristol and Cardiff with different groups, using jewellery making as a kind of initial starter.
We had laser cut copper symbols where people based their jewellery from. This process of painting and sanding, not just the process, but the thinking around it allowed for something deeper to happen.
While doing the jewellery, the kind of agenda was around creating characters based on your story that could then be co-written into a fictional novel.
Or going through the asylum process, your money is controlled, where you live is controlled. How does that make you feel? Well, immediately, not nice, terrible, it's awful, it's not great. But we wanted to go a little bit deeper. So using the fictional characters allowed us to go deeper into the story. What would it look like? Where would they be? Who would they be interacting with? And one character had at least 20 plus regulators or agencies that they interacted with on a daily, weekly basis. And that's a lot.
So I think all the time it was quite an iterative process of, okay, this is your experience and this is how you want to tell your story, but actually we also need to confront some of these misunderstandings. At one point there was a character being developed called Deborah, who I kind of took a little offence at, who was a white middle-class social worker. And lived in a cottage and had a cat and wore sandals. And I thought, oh, okay. So actually what came out of that was they're white privileged kind of professionals who have the authority to take your children away at the drop of a hat. So I managed to bring in a Jamaican social worker who was, she's been practising for 50 years, incredibly experienced, and we had a kind of very open conversation about, well, you know, what are the challenges of working with social workers?
What was the struggle? These are some quite deep, emotionally charged, huge ramifications and implications in people's lives through these stories. And that was a struggle to hold it as a practitioner. We're opening up closed doors and rooms and spaces that people had held for resilience and safeguarding purposes.
I think all the way through we've all been very honest, very professional, and I think open to difference and diversity, and I think that disposition makes a difference. I do remember Nathan, Mushtaq and I actually had a long train journey to Norwich of all places for a conference, and we're on the train for a very, very long time, and I think that again, I think that was probably a bit of a turning point actually, because we were talking about Islam, we were talking about our participants, we were talking about asylum, we were having sort of all those sort of big kind of discussions. And it was interesting that somebody sat next to us said, that's really interesting. I work for an NGO in Afghanistan. Would you mind if I came and joined you? And I think suddenly there was oh yeah, actually, we're generating some knowledge here which other people might be interested in.
So what we found is in the processes of the project developing, we found the collaboration, the co-production, the agency power, editorial ability, the ability to influence design, influence recruitment, influence the methods used, influence the end product, and influence where it goes. What was a joy? Traveling to the Utopias Festival, when we all came together as a full team. We took everybody there. We were reading through the last proofreading of the final draft of the novel on the coach. And those 2 days in London, which were just after the Brexit vote.
People talk about black groups, they tend to think that we're a homogeneous group, and we're not. You know, people have their life stories and very painful life stories. For me, it was very therapeutic.
A couple of our participants had said quite early on, look, I write original music. Can I do some music? And I said, well, yeah, absolutely. And we got there and she had her guitar and is there a space that we can just do a bit of a pop-up performance? And we did. And we did some readings of the novel.
Mona and Samira are informed by Immigration Services they are about to be rehoused. Not in Bristol, but in Cardiff. At short notice, they gather their belongings and go to the bus station.
And it was just the most moving thing that you've ever seen. And we've replicated that in a number of places. And we have people crying in the audience and saying, you've just told my story.
I'm not gonna lie, I loved it, and I want it to keep on going, and I want all of this to come back, meeting Cardiff people, making some more jewelry, selling it, whatever, and then I just want this to keep on going, I don't want it to stop.
One of the kind of really important strands, I think, in the project was to politicise our participants and to give them some tools to challenge the status quo.
Around about this time, that members of the group decided to form a community interest company in Bristol, specifically looking at the legacy and continuing on some of this work outside of the research project's parameters, because projects come and go, but the people stay.
Inevitably, this work you can only do with fairly small numbers of people because it's intensive, you get to know people really well, you're trying to kind of maintain their involvement in a project over 12 months of workshops. But to make really big critiques of the Home Office and how they treat asylum seekers, we've got indications of really deep and meaningful stories that have come out of that, but what we don't have is large numbers.
What was a surprise a baby being born into the Life Chances project. That was a surprise because we were only timetabled in to do 10 workshops. We thought, oh, okay, it'd be done by the term. No, one of the participants had a baby. Baby was born into the project and continued on.
So, what was a surprise? We thought we might have a novella. We thought we might have a nice short story of some sort. But for me, the surprise was actually having a novel that is a really good read.
Rise up, fallen fighter. Rise up, rise up, rise up.
If you are interested in finding out more about the project, please go to the Common Cause website.